Story 1. The Air in the Night. By the time I hit my mid-50s, I'd seen more of this country from behind the wheel of my rig than most folks see in their entire lives. Highways, byways, cities, towns, you name it, I've been there. I've got lots of stories from the road, but there's definitely one that stands out. It was around 2 a.m., and I was the only one on the road. The night was cold, the kind that chills you to the bone, and I was thinking of my warm bed at home. I'd been on this route countless times before, but that night, the stretch of road felt different. Coming around a bend, my headlights lit up a car pulled over on the side of the road. There was a guy standing beside it, looking at his flat tire. Now, I've always been a cautious man, especially at night. My dad used to say, "Trust your gut, son." But it was close to Christmas, and the cold was biting. I thought about my own family and how I'd feel if one of them were stranded. So, against my better judgment, I decided to help. I took the next exit, cut a U-turn, swung back around and came up behind the man and his car. The man looked up, startled, his eyes darting around nervously. He was middle-aged and dressed decently, but as soon as I stepped out of my rig, I could feel a definite tension in the air. "You okay, buddy?" I asked, trying to sound as friendly as possible. He nodded, his voice shaky. "Yeah, got a flat. Put on the spare, but it's low on air." I could see the man was rattled. His eyes were darting around between the distant road and his car's trunk. His hands were fidgeting, and he kept glancing over his shoulder. "Got an air pump in the back. Let me help you out," I offered. He looked relieved, but still uneasy. "Oh my God, that would be great. Please hurry," he muttered out. Something was definitely off, but I didn't feel like it was a smart idea to dig in too deep to try to figure out what was going on. I stopped to help, not to get involved with anything that I might regret later. As I worked on inflating the tire, I did try to make some small talk, if anything, just to ease the tension. "Cold night to be having car troubles," I commented. He gave a weak smile. "Yeah, just my luck." But his eyes never left the horizon. Just as I was wrapping up, I saw headlights in the distance. The man's face went pale, his eyes got wide, and he started slightly panting. The approaching car was an old model, probably from the 70s, with dark windows that hid its occupants. It slowed down, ominously creeping toward us. I stood up and looked back and forth between the man and the car. There was definitely something going on between them. "Somebody you know?" I asked, but there was no response. The man was rooted in his spot, his eyes locked onto the car. For a tense moment, everything was still. The old car slowed, almost to a stop, and then lingered for a few seconds, as if its occupants, if there was more than one person in the car, were calculating their next move. The confrontation felt like an eternity. I remember my heart starting to pound, and me thinking to myself, "Oh man, what did you get yourself into?" Then suddenly the car began to accelerate, heading for the next exit. Without uttering a word, the man jumped into his car and sped off, making a desperate U-turn across the median. Moments later, the old car reappeared on the opposite side, chasing after him with a vengeance. I was left standing there trying to piece together what just happened. My mind raced. Was it drugs? Money? What was in that trunk? If I hadn't stopped, what would have happened to that man? So many thoughts raced through my head as I climbed back into my truck and headed back down the road. The rest of my drive was a blur. My thoughts kept drifting back to the man in that old car. I wondered if he made it out okay, if he managed to escape whatever trouble was chasing him. I thought about calling the cops, but ultimately decided that it was probably best if I just didn't involve myself in the affairs of others anymore. Every time I run down that stretch of road, that encounter always comes to mind. I never found out what happened to the man or the car pursuing him. It does drive me crazy, though, to think about what was in that trunk. Part of me wants to know, but the other part of me is glad that I never found out. Story 2. The Ambush. I remember this night like it was last night. Driving trucks had been my gig for over 2 decades. Most folks think it's just long hours behind the wheel, but for me, it was more than just a job. It was freedom and the open road. The sound of my truck's engine was music to my ears. But this one night, it was something else. It was around 3 a.m., right in the dead of night, the time when all those ghost stories and old wives' tales you heard as a kid start creeping into your mind. I was driving down a stretch of interstate, a stretch I'd driven countless times. As I was making my way down the road, I noticed something up ahead. From a distance, I thought it might be a deer or some other critter. But as I got closer, the silhouette became clearer. It was a man, laying smack in the middle of the road. Now, I've seen my fair share of weird stuff on the job, but this was different. It didn't sit right with me. I eased my truck to a stop on the shoulder, leaving some distance between us. Something was way off. There was no vehicle around, and it didn't look like this man had been struck or anything. There wasn't any blood, and it didn't look like he had any broken bones, at least not that I could see. I remember thinking to myself, did this guy just fall out of a truck or something? Rolling down the window, I called out, "Hey man, everything okay?" Silence. No response. He just laid there. I couldn't even tell if he was breathing or not. "Yo," I shouted out. Again, nothing. Thinking I should maybe help or at least see what was up, I started to unbuckle my seatbelt. As I was doing so, something caught my eye. Out of the passenger side window, near the tree line, I saw what looked like two figures. They were just shadows, really, but my alarm bells were going off now, and I knew something wasn't right. I'm not a guy that scares easily, and I've been in some tight spots before, but something deep down told me this wasn't right. Without a second thought, I floored the gas and sped past the man, the whole scene disappearing in my rearview mirror. I reached for my phone, dialing the cops. I told them everything, the man in the road, the figures by the trees, the whole eerie setup. The operator listened, then said they'd send a car out to check it out. As I continued driving, it really dawned on me that I'd narrowly dodged a bullet. About a half hour later, I got a call back from the cops. They didn't find anything. There was no man, no figures in woods, absolutely nothing. I was dumbfounded. I knew what I'd seen, and this wasn't some overactive imagination or fatigue playing tricks on me. There was someone on that road. A couple of weeks later, I was at a truck stop, swapping stories with some of the guys. I shared my experience with them, half expecting them to laugh it off. But an older driver, a guy named Dale, leaned in and said he'd had a similar experience years ago. Said he saw a man in the road but never saw any figures in the woods. Like me, he stopped, got an eerie feeling, and just took off. I've driven that stretch of road many times since, always with an extra sense of caution. It was such a creepy situation, and I'm glad I shot out of there when I did. Looking back now, I can say with almost 100% certainty, I was almost the victim of an ambush.